What I'm about to tell you is one of the strangest stories I have ever covered in my 20 years as a reporter. And this strange story is about a talking crow named Cosmo. The bird talks and swears. He's kind of someone's pet. So he sometimes sleeps and bathes indoors. He comes when called and is generally filled with personality.
Got a problem, man. I think you're addicted.
You might even remember Cosmo from his viral internet moment back in December 2021.
Students from Allendale Elementary School were met with a visitor, a crow. He wanted to be part of the class.
He flew into a 5th grade classroom in Grants Pass, Oregon, pecked at doors, helped himself to snacks, talked and cursed at the students, and chased them around the playground.
Came in, helped itself to some breakfast, some muffins, and, of course, there's pandemonium, the kids all, screaming, and, what else would you do if a bird comes in your classroom?
Really?
The story of Cosmo came at a time during the COVID-19 pandemic when we could all use a little good news in our lives. And a talking crow that delighted children, it fit the bill. The story was all over TV news, on Oregon Live. The Associated Press even picked up the story. This American Life reached out. But after the viral moment, the story took a turn. Cosmo went missing. We're talking a bird napping, a possible bird shooting for hire. The police were involved. While a lot of people loved his antics, the bird had enemies and a dark side.
It did start out cute, yeah, but it did not stay cute.
It started with that great sort of entrance in terms of a story. As you peel it back, it really reveals a lot of the conflict with wildlife and people with people more than anything else.
I'm Samantha Swindler, and off and on for the last 2 years, I've been trying to figure out what happened to Cosmo. I spent weeks in Southern Oregon interviewing dozens of people. I wanted to know, would someone really want to kill a talking crow? And if so, who would have had the motive, means, and opportunity? If foul play were involved, was it justified? And who was Cosmo really, a victim or a villain?
My feeling is they definitely know where my bird is and what happened to him. They just won't tell me.
I know this all sounds too wild to be true, but the story is real. It's become kind of a whodunit mystery, except there was no crime committed, because killing a crow like Cosmo would have been completely legal. I'll share more on that later. If you're intrigued by this story, follow along, episode by episode, as we try to solve the mystery of Cosmo the talking crow. This is part 2 of what happened to Cosmo. Why would someone want to get rid of a talking crow in the first place? In this episode, we explore who was Cosmo really, a victim or a villain? This story takes place in rural Southern Oregon. That's where Janelle lives. She's Cosmo's owner. To Janelle, Cosmo was kind of a pet, kind of a wild bird. He would fly around outside during the day, and every night he'd peck on Janelle's window to be let inside to sleep. Janelle is a total animal lover and lives on a 5-acre property in Williams, Oregon, with dozens of other animals and her husband, Dewey.
Cosmo just sort of hang out all around here?
Oh, all over. He'd be in the fence, he'd be in the tree.
They absolutely adore Cosmo.
Cosmo had been rescued by a friend of mine, and they had him in a little cage. And I said I always wanted to have a raven.
She got a large cage to house Cosmo, who turns out was a crow, not a raven, and she soon started letting him out of the house and yard. To her surprise, he didn't fly away.
He just kind of had his own life. Like, he did what he wanted. He could go inside, he could go outside, he could go on the roof, he was everywhere. He was not friendly when I got him at all to people. I'd just go outside and I'd say, "You're beautiful," and start talking to him, and then he would just get closer and closer and just hang out with me.
To Janelle, Cosmo quickly became more than just a pet. He was part of her family.
Only Momo makes messes like that.
And the thought of someone wanting Cosmo dead was unfathomable.
I just loved that bird so much.
That's my tattoo of Cosmo.
My first contact with Janelle was over the phone in 2021, after Cosmo's visit to the elementary school made news.
A crow. He wanted to be part of the class.
I wanted to see if she could share some cute talking bird clips with me so we could edit and post them to the Oregonians' social media accounts. I figured this would be a quick job, business as usual. But when I called Janelle to ask for some video clips, she was distraught. Several days after her daughter had picked up Cosmo from the elementary school and brought him home, he'd gone missing, and Janelle was certain he was dead. She proceeded to tell me about a long-running feud with other Williams residents over Cosmo. She thought they were out to get him. Now, this seemed to me to be completely absurd, but I was curious enough to dig deeper, so I called the people Janelle mentioned, and they told me something I hadn't heard before. Cosmo was a menace.
He's actually drawn blood and hurt kids, mainly the neighbors. It's not funny. It's not fun. And he's just terror.
Our kids won't go outside without a bicycle helmet on. Yes, the police have been called many times. Many reports have been put out. It's a story worthy of reporting, but only if you report how really awful it is.
This was something I hadn't seen in the previous Cosmo coverage, but apparently Cosmo wasn't a beloved community mascot in a sleepy small town. He was, in some people's view, a predator. Now I was intrigued. This was a story. Over a series of text messages between Janelle and me, she did open up about Cosmo's bad habits. She said some people didn't like Cosmo because he stole cigarettes and sometimes dive-bombed children. At one point, a neighbor told her she was going to shoot her bird. I had to know more. So I told my editor at the time, let me spend a week in Grants Pass, and that's what I did. Next time, I share what I learned on my trip to Southern Oregon. It involves a bird napping, a crow in lockup, and 2 anonymous sources. This is part 3, Cosmo went missing before. The 2 women I talked to admitted they hated Cosmo, but they both said they didn't kill him. This seemed like too stupid a thing to bother lying to a reporter about, so I had to explore other possibilities of what happened to Cosmo. To do that, I headed to Southern Oregon to talk to as many people as I possibly could.
I mean, the bird has left a paper trail. There's a record of this bird being a nuisance to people, so.
My first stop was Wildlife Images, a wild animal rehabilitation center outside of Grants Pass.
We take in wildlife that has an injury, might be orphaned. Our goal is to make a treatment plan for that animal to ultimately be able to release it back into the wild. We also have a walking park tour of permanent ambassadors. Now, these animals can't be released to the wild for various reasons.
I stopped here because it turns out what I was investigating was actually Cosmo's second disappearance. The first time he went missing was just before he showed up at the school. On November 18th, the 2 neighbors, the ones who felt terrorized by Cosmo, worked together to coax Cosmo into a pet carrier and drop him off at Wildlife Images. For them, it was a last-ditch effort to keep the bird and their families safe.
The neighbor caught him, and I took him to Wildlife Images so he'd be out of here and in a safe place, and they released him. I couldn't believe when he came back and was on the news. Right? Yes, he ended up at a school, and then several articles, and then people like this jerk of a bird.
And side note, we'll be calling these neighbors Neighbor 1 and Neighbor 2 in this series because they spoke to me on the condition of anonymity, and my bosses okayed that. The Wildlife Center thought Cosmo was brought in for an injury, but really, it was because he was being a jerk. Or, in more formal words, Cosmo was too habituated and thus too unafraid of people.
Habituated is when they become too used to people. Wild animals should be very fearful of people. That's how they're able to survive safely in the wild.
Yeah, you can't tell me what to do.
If an animal is coming too close to people, interacting with them, that can put them in a really dangerous situation. Not everybody likes crows. They don't want them walking into their houses and landing on their kids' heads, things like that. Maintaining those appropriate boundaries is really important for their survival.
So Cosmo's trip to Wildlife Images, what we are informally calling a bird napping, was the first time he went missing. And Janelle didn't know where he was.
And I mean, I cried. I'm talking, I cried and I cried and I called. I'd get on the roof and I'd call and call and call and call and call his name. Mama! And then I went to sleep that night and I had a dream. And I woke up in the morning, I says, he's at a sanctuary. And Dewey's like, I kind of thought about that. I said, the neighbor is lying to me. When I went to her house, she never is quiet. She was simple, she wanted us to leave. She wouldn't really talk to me, it was short. She knows what happened to my bird. I know it.
During the 4 days Cosmo spent in lockup, the bird apparently played it cool. Staff said he never talked or acted strange in any way, and he was released on November 22nd. There are no records of exactly where he was released, but it likely wasn't far from Wildlife Images, which is about 30 miles north of where Cosmo lived. That school where Cosmo showed up 7 days later, as the crow flies, it's right in between. Maybe he was flying home when he got distracted by the school. But I had a few more questions for Wildlife Images, because who was this? Shortly after Cosmo disappeared for the second time, and after the school incident, Wildlife Images posted this photo to their Facebook page. They said it was an American crow named Walter, and Walter's story sounded eerily similar to Cosmo's. Too habituated, loves people. Could Walter actually be Cosmo? Next time on The Mystery of Cosmo the Talking Crow, I meet Walter and try to find out, is this Cosmo or a coincidence? This is part 4. Is Walter actually Cosmo? Just 10 days after the happy Cosmo at the school story came out, and shortly after Cosmo had disappeared again, Wildlife Images posted pictures of this crow to their Facebook page. They called him Walter, and they wrote that it was a black American crow that was too habituated to people. The timing and description were spot on, and the comments blew up. Word had gotten around the small town that Cosmo was missing, and many in the community suspected this bird was actually Cosmo, including Cosmo's owner, Janelle. So I asked Wildlife Images point blank, is this crow actually Cosmo? And they said no, and confirmed for me the receipt of the bird, which they had taken in from the Cascades Raptor Center in Eugene. While I was at Wildlife Images, I asked to meet Walter, and that's when I learned crows are really smart.
Crows are very unique animals. They have a lot of different adaptations to help them survive in the wild. They also are very intelligent. Crows actually have about the intelligence of a 3-year-old. They actually will use objects in the wild as tools, help break into some food items such as nuts. Really fun guys. They also will often manipulate tools, so they'll put different objects together to create a new tool. And that's actually only been seen in other humans and primates, which also makes them pretty unique.
I thought Walter looked sort of like Cosmo, but all crows look pretty much the same to me. So I showed some video clips I took of Walter to Janelle.
That looks like a Cosmo face, I'm not gonna lie.
Janelle said that on closer inspection, Walter's feathers didn't quite match up.
He'd have a brown feather.
Yeah, it was hard to tell the colors. I couldn't see any brown ones. But
Cosmo has a lone brown feather on his back. Walter does not. She no longer believed it was her bird. Perhaps there are more habituated crows in the world than we realized. I accepted that this black crow was likely a red herring, and as far as I knew, Cosmo was still missing. I wanted to retrace Cosmo's steps, see if he'd left behind any clues or enemies during his school day. So next stop, we needed to travel to Grants Pass and visit Allendale Elementary School. This is part 5, the school incident.
Only on NBC5 News tonight, a Grants Pass Elementary School has a new mascot. Well, not exactly, but one.
I went to Allendale Elementary, the visit that made Cosmo famous in the weeks before his disappearance, to see if the crow left any clues in his wake. I talked with Jake Musser, who's been the principal at the school for 12 years and has never in his career seen anything like Cosmo.
How did the day start? Was it like a normal day?
Normal school day, and I got word from a teacher that there was a crow in a classroom. The teacher told me the crow talks, and I thought, this teacher's losing it. But I had to hear it and see it from my own eyes and ears, and so walked down to the classroom that the crow was in, and sure enough, there was a crow on the back table, and then the crow did truly start talking and didn't have the most appropriate language that it used.
What did you perceive the crow to be saying?
Back off. But it wasn't back off. It was a different word, using the F word. But what we told the kids was that the crow was saying back off. He wanted space. He didn't want to be bothered, and it did work. The kids, were very respectful of Cosmo and gave him his space.
School staff wrangled the crow from the 5th grade classroom to the outdoors, but to their surprise, he didn't fly away.
He wanted to be around kids. It was evident, like he wanted to be where the kids were. The kids were actually going out to morning recess, and Cosmo found his way over to the playground. He was doing the dive bombing thing. The kids loved it. They're laughing and having a good time, but then you'd hear these screams. Because at that point, Cosmo was diving down towards the kids, never hurting them. Cosmo knew exactly what he was doing. didn't ever really land on a kid, but would just dive down enough just to kind of make them so they had to duck down, and then he would swoop back up and go land on another structure. And I remember at that point, I'm like, I need to call somebody.
He called Fish and Wildlife, who sent out an officer with a large net to catch the bird. It didn't work.
She struggled with trying to get Cosmo in the net. Cosmo caught on real quick, realized what she was up to. So avoided her, but stayed with the kids. At one point, he was knocking on the front door. So a student let him into the front door. He ended up in our office, flying around our office. My office manager and the secretary and I are now trying to figure out a way we can catch Cosmo, because now we got him in a tighter space. We're like, okay, now we can catch him. But we don't want to hurt him because he's a very friendly crow and pretty cool. And so we try a box, and we can't get him in the box. You know, most birds will like fly towards windows. He knew better than that. He was the smartest bird I think I've ever seen.
Another officer arrived, Oregon State Police Trooper Marty Marchand, but Cosmo had law enforcement stumped. It must have been frustrating. I tried to gauge whether police might have done something to Cosmo.
I think it would probably scar our children if something bad happened to this crow. So even when she was trying with the net,
Did he offer to shoot the bird?
I think he said there were options out there. I know Marty for a while, and I just kind of sense like maybe that's one of the options, I don't know. But I did make a comment that, yeah, let's not hurt the bird in any way, because it's a living thing and the kids really enjoy it, and we don't want any kids scarred from, you know, the bird being hurt.
The Cosmo incident has become a kind of folklore to the current and past students at Allendale Elementary. I spoke with 12-year-old Takoa, who was in the 5th grade classroom that day. Was that like an epic day?
If you were to say epic, I would update that to legendary. A bird coming into your classroom, that's like a one-in-a-lifetime thing. Like, that's only happened to me once, and that was Cosmo. They still talk about it today.
And Takoa actually knew Cosmo from before the school incident. His parents are friends with Cosmo's owners, Janelle and Dewey.
He doesn't like us. He likes Janelle a lot, but like, he still sometimes like jumps on my shoulder.
Were you scared of Cosmo at all?
Sometimes I was pretty scared. Mostly when he bit me on my head.
Like he would peck a little bit?
Yeah, peck and like kind of bite too.
Do you think that he was being mean or he was playing with you? What do you think he was doing?
I don't really know. He was probably playing with me though.
And Takoa had an alternative explanation for Cosmo's allegedly foul mouth.
One of their dogs' name is Truck, and they say he said Truck a lot, which is super cool.
Takoa said some of the younger kids were scared of Cosmo. There was an element of danger, but overall his visit was welcome.
I'd say 1/3 of the kids were scared, but 2/3, they thought that was sick, that a pro came into their classroom.
And sick, like sick is cool.
Yeah, sick, cool.
He brought so much joy and laughter to our staff and students that day that, like, I told my daughter, and she'll probably tell her kids, and I'll tell my grandkids, Cosmo was a good crow.
Jake is one of the first people to arrive at the school each morning, and the following day, Cosmo was back, pecking on the front door to be let in. But by that time, Janelle's daughter was already on her way with a cage to pick him up. She coaxed him with some tuna, got him in the cage, and drove him home. The school posted about the Cosmo visit online.
When we posted it on Facebook, we got a phone call almost immediately after the post that had said, basically, don't send this crow back to this lady because this crow is a danger. Be careful with it around the kids. And we had seen so much of it that day, I thought we hadn't seen any of what this neighbor was saying. But the neighbor, I think, didn't really appreciate Cosmo and all of his antics at home.
This was interesting. It seemed Cosmo had made friends in Grants Pass, but perhaps someone who lived near Cosmo didn't want him to come home. It was time to go back to Williams. This is part 6, Was There a Hitman? Cosmo's owner Janelle wondered if neighbor 1 and neighbor 2, who both said they had captured Cosmo once before, ultimately killed him. That's because both said they disliked the crow, and neighbor 1 had threatened to shoot him.
Here you go.
Bird comes back, it's dead. I won't put up with this bullshit anymore. Reason it's illegal to have a wild animal as a pet.
And I said, I don't know what to say to that. As far as I know, he has been here and hasn't left. I feel like that's a little much. I'm over him attacking my kids and the neighbor kids. I'll call OSP tomorrow and file a complaint. Fish and Game said to do so. So you can talk to them about it. It's so illegal for you to have him.
The first time Cosmo went missing, when he was at Wildlife Images, the two neighbors initially told Janelle they didn't know where he was or what happened to him. Eventually, though, neighbor 2 fessed up and admitted they had taken him there. So Janelle is skeptical of them now. But if they wanted the crow dead, why bother taking him to a sanctuary 45 minutes away? I needed to talk to more potential witnesses about what they may have seen or heard. And if Cosmo tormented these two neighbors, maybe others in the area also wanted him gone. Do you think it's possible that one of the neighbors shot the crow or killed the crow because it was attacking?
Absolutely possible. I'm really actually don't like guns at all because I watch other people's kids and I have parents offering, come over here and shoot the bird. I'm like, no. I would say, no, the bird's not a problem. Shoot him away. There's no, I don't want people shooting anything around me. But that's legally how you have to kill it.
So I attempted to reach every neighbor who lived near Cosmo's home to see if they knew anything. And I'm looking into a talking and sometimes aggressive crow. The first people I talked with were Tawny and Dustin, who actually loved Cosmo. What did you think then when this bird showed up to you?
Oh, blessing.
Yeah, I thought spiritual, goodwill, good omens. So at first I thought he was a raven, because that brings a lot of weight to the spiritual world that we live in. And I seen him on the video camera. I was out working. And my mother-in-law was out here playing with my babies, and he was just jumping around with everybody and talking to people, and everybody was kind of amazed, awestruck.
We felt very special, and then we found out it was someone's pet, and then we're like, oh, we still feel special because he made sure to make the attempt to come visit us every single day from the moment that he met us.
Tawny remembers clearly the last day anyone saw Cosmo. It was December 18th, 2021. Cosmo was in Tawny's yard with her kids until they left to go to the grocery store around 2 p.m. This was the last known sighting of Cosmo, and the window of disappearance is just a few hours because he didn't come home when Janelle called him just before 5 p.m. As Tawny left for the store, she noticed neighbor 1 outside having a barbecue. Cosmo loves being around people. We talked about this over the phone.
We leave to the store and we're having a barbecue. And so I'm assuming because we were all gone, he probably flew over there and got them all wild up.
And Cosmo loves taunting people who don't want him around. Even Janelle admits that.
Cosmo was kind of a prankster. That's just his personality. So if you didn't like him or if you wanted to tease him, then he would tease you back. I mean, he just had no fear.
But no one we talked to said they saw Cosmo after Tawny did that day. Big if, he went to the barbecue, we don't know what happened next. Maybe that's not what happened at all. So I reached another neighbor who didn't want his name used because he didn't want to get involved in neighborhood drama. We'll call him Neighbor 3. Neighbor 3 remembered something surprising about Neighbor 2, a conversation he recalled taking place around the end of November or beginning of December. The way he remembers it, Neighbor 2 had an unusual request.
I said, no, I'm not going to shoot your bird. And she was like, well, I've got it anyway. So I don't know if she had a 22 or what she had for her firearm, but she made it sound like she had a well in hand. And that was before I knew it was Dewey and Janelle's bird. I thought it was just this wild crow coming in attacking the kids.
Neighbor 3 also said he couldn't believe a reporter was calling him about Cosmo's story.
Seems like everything's getting blown out of proportion for what occurred. I just don't know. I think it's kind of stupid. Everybody's all up in arms. I can't believe you're actually calling me about the bird.
This conversation left me wondering, was Neighbor 2 looking to take out a bird? And if Neighbor 2 was trying to find a crow hitman, is that a crime? We'll look into that in the next episode of The Mystery of Cosmo, the Talking Crow. This is part 7, A Murder of Crows. If foul play were involved in Cosmo's disappearance, was it a crime? According to the law, no. This is Steve Niemela. He's a wildlife biologist with the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife who enforces animal regulations. I talked to Steve about the Cosmo case. He said if any crime was committed, it would have been keeping Cosmo as a pet.
The one thing that we in OSP were really interested in initially was whether the animal was captivated, because it is illegal first to pick up wildlife, but certainly it's illegal to captivate Oregon's wildlife. So our understanding initially was that the animal was free to come and go. It had been at some point in its life human habituated, which is always a negative, but free to come and go, and from a legal perspective was reassuring until we started talking to people and found out that there's a bunch of children in particular that were having real negative and sometimes sometimes threatening interactions with this animal.
Because Janelle wasn't currently keeping Cosmo in a cage, Steve said ODFW wasn't looking to pursue that as a crime. But essentially, we're all supposed to leave crows alone. Crows are protected by the Migratory Bird Treaty Act, which generally prohibits the killing, trapping, selling, and transporting of certain bird species without permission. For instance, there's a crow hunting season in Oregon from October to January, which includes the time frame when Cosmo disappeared. But Cosmo was a special case. Because he was a nuisance bird, he could be killed any time of the year, no hunting license required.
So there's a variety of things that we suggest. You can do non-lethal harassment, hazing, and things like that. But ultimately, under Oregon's laws, these animals can be killed if they're causing problems.
And Cosmo definitely caused problems. Multiple police reports had been filed about this bird, and Steve and an Oregon State police trooper responded to Cosmo's neighborhood to talk to the concerned neighbors.
We heard of incidences of the crow landing on kids and pecking at their heads. That's why the one group of kids were just wearing their bike helmets every time they left the house. Another incident was relayed where a person had to actually run out and chase the bird off of a particular kid's heads. There were some incidences that were, pretty alarming.
Ultimately, officers told the neighbors they had the right to shoot and kill Cosmo.
It's a difficult issue when you have an animal that's interacted with school kids in a somewhat interesting way. There's Oregonian articles, people are very interested in the bird, but at the same time you're talking to people whose kids are being attacked by the animal. So it's difficult how to exactly talk and what path to take, but the one thing we settled on is we have to at least give them the information about what the laws allow. And that's kind of our job in these situations, is just give people what their range of options are.
According to police reports, the conversation with officers happened after a third police report was filed about Cosmo on December 11th, 7 days before Cosmo's second disappearance. When Cosmo never returned, neighbor 1 said she thought the police might have finally taken action, perhaps lethal action.
State police was still investigating it, and after talking with us and people that actually have to live with him, they decided that he's becoming a pest and a problem, and they're worried about someone getting hurt. They said they're going to do something. They didn't know what, but I know they didn't just go get him, because you can't just go catch him. He's extremely smart.
In the next episode, we'll explore if the neighbors didn't shoot Cosmo, maybe the police did. Could it have been an act of public service? Were they tired of dealing with complaints about a nuisance bird? This is part 8, Did Police Kill Cosmo? Trooper Marty Marchand is retired from the Oregon State Police, but he was a wildlife officer with the agency when he first met Cosmo. He responded to the elementary school the day of the cute story, when Cosmo showed up to the playground.
The principal said, hey, he's out there, he's kind of not attacking kids, but he's kind of coming down, swooping down towards them, and he's talking to them, which it kind of just made me laugh, like, yeah, right. But turned out, yeah, he had been taught some words, profane words.
Trooper Marchand worked for state police as a fish and wildlife officer for 25 years, but Cosmo was a first.
I'd never had actually experienced anything like that before. I mean, crows are very intelligent birds, so it didn't surprise me, but I'd never experienced that before. Matter of fact, I'm not sure I've ever dealt with somebody who had habituated a crow.
Authorities weren't able to catch Cosmo that day at the school. The principal was told to contact police if Cosmo returned. But by the next morning, word had already reached Janelle via social media. Her daughter was able to go to the school the next day and intercepted Cosmo before police were involved.
Never was a problem at the school again, kind of was a non-issue, but then we did go out and have to address the situation by visiting the neighborhood where he was at, and neighbors that had problems with him flying into their houses, coming after pets, coming after kids, and that's when, we advised them, because he was a nuisance animal and causing problems, advise them of what their rights may be to protect themselves and prevent problems.
And that could include shooting this bird?
Yes, it could include that, yes.
Police didn't follow up to see if anyone had actually shot or killed Cosmo, but they did hear from Janelle, who contacted Oregon Fish and Wildlife after Cosmo's December 18th disappearance.
So I guess it is somewhat of a mystery of what happened to him and where he went or what happened to him ultimately.
So you obviously didn't shoot Cosmo.
No.
I asked him if he had any theories as to Cosmo's fate.
I have no idea. Honestly, I really don't have any idea. If anything happened and anybody knows anything about it, it would probably be in the neighborhood where he was, residing. We'll put it that way.
I also asked if he thought we'd ever find out what happened to Cosmo.
I imagine if something did happen to him in that neighborhood, I don't think people would want to deal with the potential of some sort of retaliation if they in fact had killed Cosmo. I don't know what happened, but it's probably one of those things nobody really wanted to talk about if it did occur.
This was something I had heard from other people in Williams. I stopped at the country store in town and asked the lady behind the counter, Erica, if she'd heard anyone talking about shooting a crow. She hadn't.
There is nothing wrong if somebody killed the crow. They were well within their rights. But I can't get anybody to fess up to having done it.
No one's going to fess up to doing it.
Even if it was legal.
Even if it was legal. No one's going to say they did it.
Why do you think that is?
This town is too small. If that crow is beloved, as much as you say it is, why would anyone admit to killing a beloved crow?
Williams is a small town. It's also a delightfully strange town. While on the hunt for Cosmo, I discovered the area is home to all sorts of people, from doomsday preppers to commune-living hippies to new age religious types to UFO researchers. Because it's so rural, everyone here has close contact with wildlife, but how people interact with it, from adopting stray wild animals to natural resource management, has long been a source of tension for the people who live here. In the next episode, we'll take a look at the bigger picture. What's going on in Williams? This is part 9. Welcome to Williams. To understand Cosmo, you've got to understand Cosmo's world. So let's step back a bit and talk about Williams, Oregon. Williams is a tiny, unincorporated community of about 1,000 people, deep in southern Oregon, between Grants Pass and Medford in the Applegate Valley. To give you a sense of the place, the only time Williams made the Oregonian recently was in 2018 when a man who was getting evicted from his mobile home booby-trapped his property and shot and wounded an FBI agent with a wheelchair rigged with fishing line and a shotgun, like Indiana Jones style. Williams' most famous resident was probably a marijuana-eating deer named Sugar Bob, who lived at a local hotel. Sugar Bob was the star of a Daily Show segment in 2015. In the same way that Cosmo was rescued as an abandoned baby crow, Sugar Bob was saved from a river and raised by humans. There's even a book about Sugar Bob at the Williams Library. If you think about stereotypical rural America, you might think of a small conservative town. But in Williams, there are actually lots of hippies. Since the 1970s, the area has been home to communes where people come to live together and get back to nature. To learn more about the area, I talked with Diana Kugel, a longtime editor of the local Applegator newspaper. Diana moved here 50 years ago to live on a commune.
How did I get here? In the hippie movement. It was a back to the land movement. I live here in these mountains because I'm a part of that, well, I hate to call it back to nature movement of the 60s, but it was a part of my upbringing anyway, so I kind of feel like I belonged here. This is rural America, and you know what the perception of rural America is. And Josephine County definitely fits that perception, except there are also a lot of people like me live here because we love it too.
You can see the effects of those early transplants today. Legal and illegal marijuana and hemp are some of the largest crops in the area. Williams is home to Herb Farm, one of the country's largest producers of herbal tinctures, and the Hawthorne Institute, which provides training in Ayurveda, a natural medicine practice that originated in India. There's also a natural grocery store called Takube, where Cosmo had fans. Talia, one of the cashiers, remembered seeing Cosmo and Janelle out and about in Williams.
It was a really magical moment. There's a woman on a horse talking to her pet raven, and his name is Cosmo, and I just fell in love with the moment, and it's one of those moments I'll never forget of how magical life can be. And then I guess he went missing again. I can't recall if there was another story about him being found or not, but I remember just really holding him in the light and hoping that he was going to get found again.
The area attracts people who march to their own drumbeat, who like to live off-grid. There's a lot of New Age spiritualism and prepper homestead type folks. There are even some UFO researchers based in town. I talked about all this with a guy named Rick at Rascals, the only bar in Williams.
For over 50 years now, this place has been attracting people of alternative lifestyles. Sitting at a table having a common conversation, and as small as it is, a few thousand people, virtually every subculture of America is represented here. And they peacefully cohabitate for the most part. That's what makes it beautiful and unique, I think.
When you're living this close to nature, there can be some differing views on how to interact with it. You've got people like Janelle, who will step in and help an animal in distress. But you have others who say the best thing is to let nature take its course.
I don't even have bird feeders. And sometimes I'm really sorry because if I had a bird feeder, I could really watch them. My neighbor who used to live across the road had bird feeders. she fed the crows. And then the bear got into her shed to get to the bird feed that she kept in the shed, and he just tore the door off and ate her bird. So I think up here in the wilds, you're attracting all kinds of creatures, and that's a bad idea. You don't want to feed the bears. Everybody knows that, but it's kind of not a good idea to feed the deer either, or the crows.
Perhaps part of the debate over Cosmo isn't just about how to get along with wildlife. It's also about how we get along with each other.
That's why I think this story is a good story, because it goes beyond just the crow. Because when there is dissension in a neighborhood, how do you get neighbors to be neighborly towards each other, to let go of these kinds of emotional attachments? Because here's a situation, very comical in a way, but why do we have to direct hatred and suspicion and anger towards each other?
After talking with Diana, I placed an ad in the Applegator asking for tips about Cosmo. I got one lead about a possible mass crow poisoning by a woman in a blue car. But it was a random email from someone unconnected to Cosmo. And I didn't want to go down another crow rabbit hole. Not when I had a solid lead, one that would take me to a Wendy's parking lot. This is part 10, a wild crow chase. I was starting to run out of leads, but Janelle and I didn't want to give up yet. One day this summer, we drove together to Sanctuary 1, another animal rescue in the Applegate Valley, on the slim chance that someone had brought them a crow. We talked to 2 volunteers who confirmed what we suspected. The sanctuary takes only farm animals, not wild birds. But one of the men we talked to mentioned seeing a local post on Reddit from the nearby city of Medford, where a guy talked about being followed by a crow outside a grocery store. The Reddit poster even wrote a song about it. We tracked down the post, which had been made within the last week. Janelle got excited. Maybe it's Cosmo.
And it flew on, it's on her car. That crow is on her. No, Cosmo would do that. He's looking for me. Oh my gosh, I missed her crying.
She and Dewey rushed the 30 miles to Medford while I followed shortly behind. When I arrived at the store parking lot, I found Janelle yelling at a murder of crows next to a Wendy's.
Oh my God, it's him.
Oh my God.
Most of the birds flew away, but a lone crow landed on a light pole and seemed to call back to Janelle. Dewey and I were stunned. Janelle was in near hysterics. I cannot tell you how, shocking this was. But as she got closer, the crow flew away. She tried to follow, but the bird didn't look back. In the end, it wasn't Cosmo. Janelle knows her bird would have come to her.
I don't think it's him. He would come up really close to people. It wouldn't just be just one person. I mean, it was very exciting for a moment.
But we wouldn't stop looking. I spent days trying to track down a woman named Tamara. She's another Williams local who had apparently told Janelle's stepdaughter at the local pizza shop that she knew someone had shot Cosmo. But when I talked to Tamara, she didn't provide any helpful leads. After I showed up to her house unannounced to follow up on an earlier interview, she had words of caution about my investigation.
Remember when I told you, don't just go to anybody's house without calling? Remember I told you that? Remember when I first met you and I warned you, don't just go to somebody's house without calling first, because people are really there's the ones that don't want to be found and the ones that are wanted out here. No, you'll get shot out here. People aren't playing.
Despite that warning, next episode, I press ahead.
Come on. Quit going to the neighbor's house, Momo. Quit causing trouble. Why you gotta cause so much trouble, Momo?
This is part 11, Confronting the Neighbors. Janelle thought one or both of her neighbors could be involved in Cosmo's disappearance. She was so persistent that neighbor number 2 obtained a no trespass order from the sheriff's department. It meant Janelle could no longer go to her property because Janelle wouldn't stop confronting her about the bird. Both neighbors spoke with me initially on the phone, but I wanted to read their reactions during a face-to-face conversation. Neighbor 1 originally agreed to meet with me over coffee, then ghosted me and wouldn't answer calls or texts. I hadn't been able to nail anything down with neighbor 2 either. But I'd already traveled 4 hours to Williams, so I just went to their houses. I didn't call first. This is a rural area. Most of the homes are set back from the road, behind gates or down gravel drives. The first house I came to belonged to neighbor 2, the one who had asked about having the guy across the street shoot a bird. She had a locked gate. I parked my car on the side of a dirt road, thinking about what to do, when a van drove by and stopped at the gate. I grabbed my recorder, ran from my car, and caught up with the driver. It was neighbor number 2's adult daughter going up to the house.
Excuse me. Hi.
Hi.
Are you?
I am.
I'm Samantha. I work at the Oregonian, and I'm doing a story about Cosmo the crow. And I'm trying...
Still?
Yes.
Okay. My kids were deathly afraid of that bird. We couldn't play outside because he would dive bomb them. He was dangerous to be around children, and I have small dogs that he would also attack, so I couldn't have the dogs outside. I couldn't have the kids outside. He would be in the trees and swooping. And if we went on walks, he would be swooping. My aunt was outside taking a picture of the kids climbing in the tree, and he came down and bit her hand from holding the phone up. He came and drew blood on her. There was a definite danger and fear of being outside.
Eventually, her mom, neighbor 2, joined our conversation at the gate.
That's what we tell the kids, that he found his family, he's with his flock, acting like a bird. We just try to re-educate them that they're just, they're not dangerous.
He's a wild animal.
They're a wild animal. They're not dangerous if you don't tame them, though.
Right.
Yeah. It's exactly the same with the bear. When they feed the bears, it ruins the bear. The bear has to be killed because it can't stop coming to humans for food.
She reiterated that she didn't know what happened to Cosmo.
I don't know how many people live on this road. We don't know where all he went. We know he was drawn to kids. Not everybody's on social media. Not everybody's going to call 911 and call ODF and wildlife images. Who can help with this problem in a humane way? Most people are going to go, there's a pest. I'm going to kill the pest.
Yeah.
And not talk about it on Facebook.
Yeah. And finally, I asked about that bird hitman request neighbor 3 remembered.
I didn't ask him to shoot Cosmo. I said, because we were talking about, and he had shot raccoons, that they were bothering getting into the dog food or whatever. I've got them, they come in on the back porch, and I'm like, what do you do about raccoons? He's like, meh, I shot him. I said, yeah, but would you shoot a bird in this neighborhood? I can see a raccoon. They get huge. That's a big target. But a bird is like as big as your microphone.
So she was talking hypotheticals in the context of a conversation around outdoor pests. Her candor in talking with me and her explanation seemed to make sense. And that made me even more determined to talk to neighbor number 1. I also went to her house, and the gate was open, so I drove in.
Hello, doggy.
Once I was over the hill, I saw signs posted on the trees that said, "We don't dial 911," and "Violators will be shot, survivors will be reshot." The resulting conversation wasn't great. Neighbor number 1 came out onto her porch and said she wasn't interested in talking with me or participating in a story. She again said she didn't kill the bird, and she used several expletives, saying that nobody cares what happened to a bleeping bird more than a year and a half ago. We talked on the porch for a few more minutes before neighbor 1 asked me to leave, and I did, with no more answers than I had before. As I was leaving, neighbor 1 said that I would never find out what happened to Cosmo. Never seems harsh. In the next episode, I can't let go of the idea that Cosmo might still be out there. This is part 12. Is Cosmo still out there? I've got a timeline of Cosmo's last days. I've got a couple of people who wanted him gone, but I have no hard evidence and no confession. Without a body, I can't determine if Cosmo got injured, captured, or died of natural causes, or just flew away. He likely didn't die of old age. He was still considered young in crow years, and crows in this area don't generally migrate. Any number of things could have happened to Cosmo. He could have been captured by someone who found a talking crow, thought he'd make a cool pet, and took him home, not knowing he had other humans looking for him. Or he could have picked on the wrong person, who didn't hesitate to shoot. I do believe, because Cosmo was so drawn to humans, it's likely humans who had something to do with his disappearance. Steve, the wildlife officer, suspected that we'll never know for sure what happened to Cosmo.
I don't know if someone took action, but frankly, it's a wild animal, it's subject to predation. It was causing damage to a lot of people. There was also a crow hunting season on. There's a lot of different variables that can make any individual animal disappear at a time.
For State Trooper Marty Marchand, the saga of Cosmo the Talking Crow is a cautionary tale.
Habituating them to humans, the interaction most of the time is pretty negative. And that's what happened here. Yeah, my 25 years with the state police as a fish and wildlife officer, we've seen so many types of animals that people have taken into captivity that they shouldn't, from seizing bears, bear cubs, you name it. And there really is never a positive side to it. And I guess this episode with Cosmo is just another example of that.
I also talked with Janelle's stepdaughter, Darian, who had a strained relationship with Cosmo, but she wanted closure for her stepmom.
Hear the words come out of someone's mouth like, hey, I just wanted to let you know that this is how everything went down. I'm truly sorry, but it had to be done just because of the kids. Because I do think that he might have hurt a couple of the kids, so went a little too far with them. Even if it's a hurtful truth, I think it will help with the closure, and maybe she can kind of move on from it, because I think she still in her mind thinks that she'll see him again one day. She's had dreams and all of these feelings that she had that he's not truly gone, and that could just be his spirit that's still around. I mean, it was a strong bond that they shared, so I could still see like his spirit sticking around and being there for her. But to hear the words, yeah, it would be closure for her for sure.
Janelle still looks for Cosmo to this day. Occasionally, she'll call for him.
I went running at Pacifica, I think it was last week, and I could hear the birds talking. So I started calling out his name, and about 30 of the birds around here got together, and they flew around me in a big circle. And they basically said, I know who you are, and I'm sorry. This is a creature that is probably extremely close to being human. They mate for life, they have neighborhoods, they have territories, and they have friends. They live with their family until they're like anywheres, clear up into their teenage years. And then they go off. And they stay close to what they call their family. There's no way that bird would leave me and be gone. There's no way.
Let's go. Are we walking? Come on, Mama.
So many people have pets. And so many people are so worried about what's going to happen to their pet. They just like keep them in a kennel all day long. Don't let them go anywhere. They live in this fear. Like, I would rather have an animal that was free and could do whatever they wanted and lived a full life and was happy than an animal that was stuck in a cage for safety reasons. And there's two kinds of people. There's people that live with no fear and people that live with fear, in my opinion. I don't live that way. And I don't think Cosmo did either.
It's been 2.5 years since I started this investigation. And what do I know? I know Cosmo's story is ultimately a tragedy. Neighbor 2 once described Cosmo as being caught between worlds. And I think she's right. He was too wild to be a pet, too human to be a crow. The way Cosmo became Cosmo, it was with the best of intentions. What would you do if you found an injured animal? And it's one thing to know you should leave wild things be, but it's another to be able to walk away from a creature in need. Here's the other thing I know. If your children were scared, you'd protect them the best way you could. I don't think this story has a bad guy. It has people trying to do the best thing and an animal doing what's in its nature. In the end, we may never know what happened to Cosmo. But if you watch this far, like me, maybe you'll never look at a crow the same way again. We'll look into that in the next episode of... What Happened to Cosmo. Except that's not what we're calling it. This is what happened on Anchorman. I would totally say San Diego of the local alligator of certain trapping and the Hawthorne Institute, which provides training in it's that word I don't know how to say. Do you say herbal? I mean, like if you met a guy named Herb, I think I have a little bit of an accent, like a country accent. I like to live off grid. I have lost it.
I wish I knew what this bird was.
Diane moved here 50 years ago to live on a commune.
Always sings to me, he goes